Next week, the United States will head to the polls for the midterms. Joe Biden making it clear how important he believes Tuesday is.
5 days to go, and until the most important elections in our lifetime.
Former President Donald Trump rallying the troops, giving his strongest indication yet he'll make a play for his old job in 2024.
And now, in order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very.
You gotta laugh. Now, someone who'd be loath to see that happen, his former White House Director of Communications. Anthony Scaramucci had a shorter tenure in that job than Liz Truss as UK PM. He lasted 10 days after an off-the-record rant about Trump was made public. I suspect he wears it as a badge of honour. And he hasn't changed his tune much at all since then. Anthony joins me now. Thank you so much for your time. We'll get to Trump very shortly. But first of all, the midterms, what are you predicting?
Yeah, listen, I think the consensus right now in the United States is that the House is going to go to the Republicans, and that because of weak Republican candidates, that the Democrats may be able to hold on to the Senate. I believe that the Republicans are going to take the House and the Senate, even though they have weak candidates in places like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. I think those races are very, very close, and I think there's a lot of anti-Democrat or anti-Democratic Party sentiment right now. And historically, that has been the case for the sitting president, whether it's Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump. You pick the president. The only president that's won the midterms in the last 40 years was George W. Bush, and that was during wartime. So, I don't think the Biden administration is going to buck that trend.
Now, in terms of issues that people are voting on, I know the Democrats would be very keen to have abortion and Trump, say, as the two of the biggest issues. But what do people in America really care about right now?
I think people vote their wallets. Again, people are not going to like me saying this. I'm a pro-choice person myself, but I don't think that issue has the resonance that they originally thought it would. So I don't see the fervor or sentiment driving voters out to the polls as much as the Democrats would like.
Does President Trump's involvement hurt the Republicans?
Well, I think it does. And again, I want to speak objectively about President Trump, despite my disagreements with him and my denouncing him during the 2020 election. I think he had value to the Republicans, but I think it's become dangerous, and I think it's become fringe value at this point. And I'll just give you an example. The gentleman that's running here in New York State for governor, the Democrats are polling poorly here in New York. The crime rate is higher in the city. The cost of living has affected the economics of lower and middle class people. A moderate Republican like George Pataki in 1994 could win this race. But I think because of Lee Zeldin's tie to Donald Trump and sort of that MAGA movement, and the fact that he voted with the president related to the election. Of course, there was no election fraud in the U.S., this sort of big election lie. There were people welded to the president, I think mostly as a result of political fear.
Would you like to see him at any stage back in the White House?
I'd like to see him in the big house. I don't want to see him in the White House. The big house is slang, obviously, for prison here in the U.S. I mean, come on, the guy is a joke. I mean, you have to look at the empirical evidence of what he persecuted on the U.S. He lost the election, but was such a baby about it, he couldn't admit that he'd lost the election. He didn't spend any time with the Biden administration helping for a peaceful transition. He's the first president in our history to do that. As a Republican, he is the Herbert Hoover of this generation, of this century. He lost the House, he lost the Senate, and the American presidency. He's the only Republican presidential candidate to do that in 100 years or 93 years. So, no, I would not like to see him back in the White House. People that worked in the White House with him, remember, I worked on the campaign for him, and I was only in the White House for a short period of time, 11 days, but I'm very close to General Kelly and General McMaster, Jim Mattis, and others that worked with him. he just lacked the intellectual curiosity necessary to make the hard decisions that have to come out of the White House. And so I don't think anybody that has their own financial independence or that are not tied to him politically, that are willing to speak honestly about him, would want him back in the White House.
You obviously saw something in him, though, at some stage to want to work for him in that capacity. Is that before you knew him well enough?
No, I mean, to be fair, and again, I always want to be objective with the president, what I saw in him was very relatable to my upbringing. You know, the U.S. has a dilemma right now where we took blue-collar families. I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was a crane operator. We took economically viable, economically aspirational blue-collar families, and we turned them into economically desperational ones over the course of a generation and a half. And I think that that's sad and tragic. Like it or not, Donald Trump saw that. I did 71 campaign stops with him. I think he represented something to that group, a force for change, a force for trying to make the situation better for them. Unfortunately, empirically, they didn't come up with, in the Trump administration, a lot of good policies to help that situation. In fact, if anything, that situation is worse 6 years on from my campaign experience. But yes, I want to be fair. I liked a lot of Mr. Trump's policies. I liked directionally what he was thinking about in a lot of different ways. It was just the borderline personality stuff and sort of the full-on craziness of his Twitter feed.
I think even a lot of his own supporters might agree with you on that one. Anthony Scaramucci, thank you so very much for your time, and we'll watch with interest over here in Australia.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you guys. Thank you.